Before proceeding further, let us first examine a few popular stories prevalent in Muslim societies about Muhammad's departure from Mecca and about the cruelty and intolerance of the Quraysh. Was Muhammad driven out of Mecca? Muslims indisputably believe that the Quraysh drove Muhammad and his followers out of Mecca, forcing them to relocate to Medina in 622, a journey, famously known as the Hijra or Hijrat. According to this story, the Quraysh had sent assassins to kill the beloved Prophet. Being informed of it by someone, Muhammad fled Mecca in the company of his trusted disciple and friend, Abu Bakr. As the assassins pursued them, they took refuge inside a cave in Mount Thor about an hour's journey from Mecca. By the time the pursuers came to the cave, pigeons had made nests and laid eggs, whilst spiders had spun webs instantaneously covering the entrance to it. Thinking that no one could have entered the cave a short while earlier, the pursuers left. Thereafter, Muhammad and Abu Bakr left from there in the darkness of night and reached Medina after a 12 days journey. This story is presented in Islamic folk stories and literatures as a miraculous act of God that saved Muhammad. Although the Quraysh's attempt to assassinate Muhammad remains a popular story in Islamic literatures and an incontestable belief amongst Muslims, there is little evidence to substantiate this claim for a number of reasons. Firstly, relocation overseas or attempt to do so was rather common in Muhammad's community during his prophetic mission in Mecca. By 615, the opposition to Muhammad's mission grew strong as a result of his increasing insult of the existing religion, customs, and culture. This made his preaching activity somewhat difficult. Muhammad's disciples were now being enticed by their families to return to their ancestral faith. According to al-Tabari, the greatest Islamic historian, the Quraysh were able to seduce some Muslim converts back to paganism, a trial which shook the people of Islam. Fearing that they will be seduced from their religion, Muhammad commanded them to emigrate to Abyssinia, records al-Tabari.xi. With this instruction, about a dozen of his disciples, who were more vulnerable to family pressures, secretly departed with their families in small groups to Abyssinia, Ethiopia. In 616, a second wave of emigration took place. According to different estimates, 80 to 111 disciples of Muhammad had migrated there. These self-exiled disciples returned to Mecca and later to Medina after 6 months to 13 years. A few of them had converted to Christianity and died in Abyssinia as Christians. It is thought that Muhammad had sent them there not only to protect them from being seduced back to their ancestral religion but also to create a sanctuary there in case he had to relocate elsewhere, because of the failure of his mission in Mecca or that staying in Mecca became truly dangerous. Faced with Muhammad's increasing defiance and insult of their religion and customs, the Quraysh slapped a social excommunication and economic blockade against his community in 617. It was withdrawn 2 years later. Although the V. al-Tabari, 1988, The History of al-Tabari, Trs. W. M. Watt and M. V. MacDonald, State University of New York Press, Vol. 6, p. 45. Blockade withdrawn, Muhammad's prophetic mission came to almost a standstill as open preaching became nearly impossible. Under these circumstances, he went to Taif in 619 in search of a new sanctuary. Both Muhammad and the Quran had already insulted Al-Lat, the chief deity of the Taifites. But they did not resist his entry into their community. At Taif, he asked the people to leave their ancestral religion and join his creed. More importantly, he sought to incite a rivalry among the Taifites against the Quraysh with whom they had good trade relations. Muhammad stayed there for 10 days and met the leading men to convince them of his religious mission and anti-Quraysh ploy. Ibn Ishaq describes his mission to Taif as thus: the apostle sat with them and invited them to accept Islam and asked them to help him against his opponents at home, Mecca. But he failed to achieve anything from his two-pronged prophetic and anti-Quraysh mission to Taif. Despaired and fearful of increased hostility from the Quraysh upon his return to Mecca, he requested the Taifites before leaving, seeing that you have acted as you have, keep the matter secret. 12 The news reached Mecca anyway. Even then, the Quraysh did not show any serious displeasure against him and he returned to Mecca without facing any hostility. These precedents of Muhammad's attempt to relocate to Taif in 619 and sending his disciples to Abyssinia twice make it hard to believe that the Quraysh tried to assassinate him, forcing him to relocate to Medina. Muhammad's eagerness to migrate to Medina as early as 620, as narrated below, adds further increased credibility to the assassination claim. His mission stagnant in Mecca, Muhammad caught up with a number of pilgrims from Medina during the pilgrimage season of 620 and preached his creed to them. 6 of them converted. Muhammad, describing the difficulty of his mission in Mecca, sought to migrate to Medina and inquired if they will be able to protect him there. 13 But those converts discouraged him on the account of an ongoing deadly feud between 2 tribes in Medina and asked him to defer his emigration to a more suitable time. During the pilgrimage next year, 12 men, including those of the previous year, met Muhammad secretly at a place called Aqaba. They pledged allegiance to his faith, which became known as the first oath of Aqaba in Islamic annals. 14 Muhammad sent his Meccan disciple Musab ibn Umayr with them for instructing the neo-converts in their new faith. Musab's preaching bore fruit in expanding Muhammad's faith in Medina. During the next pilgrimage season, 622, 75 citizens of Medina, 73 men and 2 women, accompanied Musab to Mecca and held a secret meeting with Muhammad at Aqaba again. During the meeting, Muhammad's uncle Al-Abbas, who had accompanied him to the secret rendezvous, announced Muhammad's desire to relocate to Medina, saying that although the Prophet's kinsmen and disciples would protect him in Mecca, but he, Muhammad, preferred to seek protection from you. Ibn Ishaq, p. 192-93. 13 Muir, p. 114. 14 Ibn Ishaq, p. 190. Medina converts. If ye be resolved and able to defend him, then give the pledge. But if you doubt your ability, at once abandon the design. To this, the Medina converts replied, We have heard what you say. You speak, O Apostle, and choose for yourself and for your Lord what you wish. Then Muhammad spoke and ended by saying that I invite your allegiance on the basis that you protect me as you would your own women and children. Upon this, Al-Bara, a Medina convert, took his hand and said, By him who sent you with the truth, we will protect you as we protect our women. We give our allegiance and we are men of war possessing arms which have been passed on from father to son. This pledge of the Medina converts, known as helpers or Ansars in Islam, is called the second oath of Aqaba. 15. This story makes it clear that Muhammad was obviously not in any impending danger in Mecca at this point in time, 622. Even then, he was eager to relocate to Medina on his own accord as early as 620. A couple of months before his relocation to Medina in 622, he secured a pledge for his protection from his Medina converts. The question thus arises, when he was so eager to move to Medina, where the prospect of his religion was already very promising, why someone needed to drive him out of Mecca. Furthermore, prior to his departure in late May 622, he had already ordered his disciples to move to Medina in early April and they migrated there in small groups over the next 2 months. Muhammad and his trusted comrade Abu Bakr and their families were the last ones to leave Mecca. Under this background, the following questions warrant a thorough consideration. 1. What was the purpose of Muhammad's eager interest to migrate to Medina and obtaining a guarantee of his protection once relocated? 2. Why did he send his disciples away to Medina over the months prior his own departure? 3. What was he going to do in Mecca alone, where his prophetic mission had come to a standstill? These circumstances and evidence, which come from the most authentic and authoritative Islamic sources, clearly suggest that Muhammad had RMLY and eagerly decided to relocate to Medina. Therefore, no one needed to drive him out or try to kill him, when he was going away on his own accord, saving the Quraysh of his insult, annoyance, and social and family discords, which they had put up with for 13 years. Furthermore, after Muhammad left for Medina, his disciple Ali, later his son-in-law, along with Abu Bakr's wife and daughter Aisha, she was engaged to Muhammad, remained in Mecca for a few more days. And none of them faced any harm or harassment, not even questioning, from the Quraysh. Islamic historian Ibn Ishaq informs us that the Quraysh reckoned, Muhammad had gained adherents outside the tribe, in Medina, and, they were no longer safe against a sudden attack. Then they wondered upon putting him in irons behind bars. 15 Ibid, p. 204, Muir, p. 129-130. To drive him away, or to assassinate him, and the last course of action was adopted. Point 16. But it does not conform to any logic or reason that, if the cruel Quraysh, as Islamic literatures depict them, were hell-bent on killing Muhammad, they would not molest or at least question Ali and the females of Muhammad's and Abu Bakr's families, left behind after Muhammad's miraculous escape. Instead, after Muhammad's successful flight, Talha, who had already gone to Medina, returned to Mecca and took away the family members of Abu Bakr and Muhammad like nothing had happened. Point 17. These factors make it almost impossible to believe that the Quraysh had attempted to assassinate Muhammad or drove him out. Even Allah had seen a prospect of success of Muhammad's mission in Medina and ordered him to relocate there, as said Muhammad, I was ordered to migrate to a town which will swallow, conquer, other towns and is called Yathrib, and that is Medina, Medinatul Nabi, abode of the Prophet, Bukhari 3:95. Allah also gives a concise account of the Quraysh's treatment of Muhammad and his community in a verse, Quran 2:217, revealed later, graver is it in the sight of Allah to prevent access to the path of Allah, to deny him, to prevent access to the sacred mosque, and drive out its members. Allah clearly suggests that the people of Mecca simply did not accept Muhammad's creed, prevented others, often the family members, from accepting Islam, and denied Muhammad's community access to the Kaaba. Allah makes no mention that the Quraysh tried to assassinate Muhammad or any other Muslim. By drive out its members, Allah likely meant that, since the Quraysh did not accept Islam, Muhammad had to relocate to Medina for a better prospect of success. Muhammad himself affirmed such an analysis at the battlefield of Badr. After the Quraysh were defeated, Muslims were unceremoniously throwing their dead bodies into a mass grave. Like a psychopath, Muhammad yelled over those dead bodies, O people of the pit hellfire, you were an evil kinsfolk to your prophet. You called me a liar when others, Medina people, believed me, you cast me out when others took me in, you fought against me when others fought on my side. 18 Here again, Muhammad makes no mention of an attempt to assassinate him. The fighting mentioned here meant the fighting, which he himself initiated after relocating to Medina, described below. Prior to that, there was no fighting between Muslims and the Quraysh, neither could the Medina people fight on Muhammad's side in such battles. The story of the Quraysh's attempt to assassinate Muhammad was most likely invented by him, hoping that, the people of Medina would more likely show him sympathy when he arrived there, or that he had intended to set the people of Medina, particularly his converts, on a hostile term against the Quraysh. The fact that Muhammad, soon after his relocation to Medina, launched an aggressive and violent jihad against the Quraysh gives credence to such a possibility. Let us also recall here Muhammad's failed attempt to incite enmity amongst the Taifits against the Quraysh in similar fashion 3 years earlier. 16 Ibn Ishaq, p. 121-122-17 Muir, p. 165. 18 Ibn Ishaq, p. 306. Were the Meccans a cruel people? Islamic discourse gives the impression that the Quraysh tribesmen of Mecca were probably the most barbaric people, who had enacted immense cruelty on the Prophet. One Muslim wrote to me that many Muslims perished, died under torture, in many horrific ways for 13 years. 19 They use such allegations to justify Muhammad's campaign of terror against the Quraysh and his capture of Mecca and destruction of their religion. The Quraysh have been repeatedly depicted as uncivilized and cruel oppressors and enemies of Allah in the Quran and the Sunnah. Even while in Mecca, Muhammad called them wicked and sinners, who were bent upon wickedness. Supreme Quran 56:46 and wretched. who will be thrown into the midst of a fierce blast of fire and in boiling water. Quran 56:41-42. Muhammad even denounced and threatened the pagans of Mecca with temporal consequence in saying, "Thus shall we deal with the guilty. Woe on that day unto the rejecters of truth." Quran 77:18-19. He called himself and his followers the righteous, and those who rejected it were liars, wrongdoers and inventors of falsehood. He consigned the Meccan idolaters to the eternal re of hell. Some of the initial verses read as follows. 1. Then will he be of those who believe, and enjoin patience, constancy, and self-restraint, and enjoin deeds of kindness and compassion. Such are the companions of the right hand of God. But those who reject our sign, on them will be fire vaulted over, all round. Quran 90:17-20. To those who believe not in the signs of Allah, Allah will not guide them, and theirs will be a grievous penalty. It is those who believe not in the signs of Allah that forge falsehood, it is they who lie. Quran 16:104-05. However, the claim that the Quraysh had enacted inhuman cruelty on Muhammad and his community, which is widely prevalent in Islamic societies, is very hard to substantiate. Faced with the helpless arid desert environment and hardship of those days, the citizens of Mecca used to be a deeply religious people. They had assembled 360 idols in the sanctuary of their god, the Kaaba, for worshipping in order to earn God's favor. They had also turned the Kaaba into the most venerated object of piety and center of pilgrimage for the pagans of Arabia and beyond. They used to hold the Kaaba in similar esteem as do Muslims of today. Muhammad not only groundlessly laid a claim on the Kaaba to be a sanctuary of his own God, his verses also termed the religion of the pagans to be false. Despite these insulting remarks and audacious claims and demands, the Quraysh allowed Muhammad and his community to live in Mecca for 13 years. Muhammad exercised a good degree of freedom to preach his creed for the first 7 years until his messages became overtly hostile and insulting to the Quraysh. 19 Islamic literatures record no incidents of death. No Muslim died in anti-Islam violence during Muhammad's stay in Mecca.